My sister's just a gate guard. Who would want her? She mocked. The room burst into laughter. My mom added, she's the shame of this family. The groom, a major, stood up, looked at me and said, actually, she's my mom. Froze. My sister fainted. Update 1. They thought I wouldn't show up. They thought shame could keep me away. I stared at the invitation for almost an hour. It sat there on the metal desk like it didn't know what it was carrying. A white envelope, embossed edges. My name printed in full, Lieutenant General Rebecca Cole. Whoever addressed it must have done so from a list. They clearly didn't know I hadn't been Rebecca to this family for years. The seal on the back wasn't broken yet, but I already knew what was inside. I'd heard whispers and email forwards that reached my aide and offhand comments from a former classmate, but it wasn't real until that moment. Haley was getting married, and not just married, she was marrying Major Andrew Foster. The irony was almost surgical. 6 years. That's how long it had been since my mother's voice last crossed state lines to find me. Not a birthday, not a condolence when my second deployment nearly took my hearing, just silence. And now this elegant little punch to the ribs signed not with love or warmth, but one word in that familiar script: behave. The base in Stuttgart was unusually quiet that afternoon. Outside my quarters the wind pushed against the flagpole, making it creak in defiance. Inside the room held the familiar sterility of discipline, the kind I had built my bones around. A steel bed, a row of pressed uniforms, a locked trunk with contents no one would touch. I turned the invitation over in my hands like it might change shape. When the knock came, it was a crisp double rap. Simmons. He entered without waiting. General, he said, glancing at the envelope. I heard. Of course he had. Simmons had ears like radar, and the patience of granite. He took a seat without asking. We didn't talk much about personal matters, but he had known me since I was a fresh-faced captain with too much grit and not enough trust. You going? He asked. I didn't answer. Instead I slid the invitation across the table. He picked it up, squinted at the gold lettering, and exhaled through his nose. Foster, he said, almost to himself. That's the kid you pulled out of a crater in Helmand, right? Same one, I said. My voice was steady, clipped. Simmons leaned back in his chair. You saved his life, and now he's marrying your sister. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was familiar, like everything else in my life. It held more meaning than sound. Simmons didn't pry, he just waited. You think I should go? I asked finally. He studied me for a beat. That depends. You going to fight a war, or bury a ghost? I laughed. Not the kind that lifts weight, but the kind that recognizes a scar. Maybe just watch one burn. He didn't smile. Then go. But don't wear your stars like armor, wear them like memory, let them remember who you became without them. His words sat with me even after he left. I placed the invitation on my desk again, and walked to the narrow window that overlooked the training field. A new class of recruits was running drills. Eager, loud, unknowing. I envied them for a brief moment. A gust of wind rattled the pane. Somewhere below, a drill sergeant barked a command, and someone shouted back, "Sir." "Yes sir," with the kind of blind fire I'd long extinguished in myself. I went to the closet, took down my dress uniform, the one I hadn't worn since the funeral, the one I didn't get to speak at. I laid it flat on the bed, smoothing the sleeves like they were old wounds. That day came back sharper than I expected. They had buried my father with full honors. Marine Corps band, 21-gun salute, but no one saved a seat for me on the front row. My mother sat between Haley and Uncle Roy, her lips pressed in that sharp, bitter line of hers. When I approached, she didn't look up. Haley had glanced at me briefly, eyes unreadable, before turning back to the ceremony, as if I were nothing more than a uniform out of place. I stood the entire time. Afterwards, Barbara Cole had placed a single hand on my forearm and said, "You shouldn't have come in uniform. It makes it look like you're trying to upstage the family." The family. I remembered saying nothing, just walking away, and I hadn't turned back since. Now here I was, 6 years and 2 continents later, holding a wedding invitation that reeked of reconciliation disguised as obligation. Andrew Foster. It wasn't just the marriage that stung. It was that he, of all people, was tying himself to the woman who had once told me, on record no less, that I was a disgrace to the Cole name. I thought of the night in Helmand, the explosion, the dust, the twisted steel. Andrew's leg nearly severed. I'd crawled across open ground to reach him, blood in my mouth, shrapnel in my shoulder. I still had the scar. He had whispered, "I owe you," before they airlifted him out. And now he was marrying Haley. I sat down and opened my laptop. Flight schedules. Richmond, Virginia. 1 stop in Frankfurt. I chose the reday. Quiet. Anonymous. I didn't inform base command. I didn't even tell my driver. The ticket confirmation hit my inbox 30 seconds later. I didn't go to be welcomed. I went to be seen for the first time in years. 3 years ago, I pulled Andrew Foster from a live minefield. In 2 weeks, he'll marry the woman who destroyed me. The irony dripped like sweat through memory. I could still hear it. The brittle crack of static through my comms. The sharp inhale before someone whispered, "Shit, that's a mine." Then the shrill bark of my own voice, sharper than I remembered it. "Don't move." Andrew froze. Dust clung to his skin. The metal plate he'd stepped on was half exposed just under the dirt. He didn't dare breathe. Neither did I. We stared at each other across 10 feet of open hell. In that stretch of silence, something unspoken passed between us. He knew he was dead, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I don't remember the pain, just the crawl, elbows grinding into gravel, every breath tasting like ash. I disarmed it with fingers I couldn't stop from trembling. When it clicked out of armed mode, Andrew cried quietly. I didn't mention it in the report. Now you can watch the second part by pressing share, and more.